The room went silent the moment I called my husband my backup plan. I had meant it as a joke, the kind of careless joke people make when they are surrounded by old classmates, champagne glasses, and memories they desperately want to impress. But the smile on my husband's face disappeared so quickly that my stomach dropped. He looked at me across the bright afternoon banquet hall, surrounded by people who had once known me as the girl who dreamed of having everything, and quietly asked me to repeat what I had just said. I wish I could tell you that I immediately understood how badly I had hurt him. I didn't. At that moment, I was still too busy trying to look successful. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of realizing someone's worth before it is too late, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, leave a comment, and subscribe to Heart Kindness Tales. Sometimes one story can remind us that the people standing quietly beside us may be the very people holding our entire world together. My name is Maribel Rowan, and for most of my adult life, I had been obsessed with proving that I had made something of myself. In high school, I had been the girl who wrote goals in the back of every notebook. I wanted a beautiful house, an impressive career, expensive vacations, and a husband who looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine. I thought success was something people could see. I thought love was something that should make other people jealous. And when I met my future husband, Callum, I almost overlooked him because he did not fit the picture I had drawn in my head. Callum was quiet, dependable, and endlessly patient. He repaired old bicycles in a tiny neighborhood workshop and spent his evenings helping his younger sister with homework. He never talked about becoming rich. He talked about becoming useful. When my car broke down on a rainy afternoon, he was the person who came to help. When I lost my first job and sat on the kitchen floor convinced that my life was over, he made tea and stayed beside me until I stopped crying. When I finally received a promotion, he celebrated more loudly than I did. He never seemed threatened by my ambition. He simply believed in me. We married on a warm spring morning beneath a row of flowering trees. Our wedding was small. There were no celebrities, no luxury cars, and no extravagant decorations. But when I looked into Callum's eyes as I walked toward him, I felt something I did not yet have the wisdom to appreciate. I felt safe. Over the next 12 years, our life became ordinary in the most beautiful way. We bought a modest house with a creaky porch. We planted tomatoes in the backyard. We argued about whose turn it was to wash dishes and laughed when our dog stole socks from the laundry basket. Callum eventually became a project manager for a construction company, and I built my own career in marketing. We were never wealthy, but we were comfortable. Then, slowly, something inside me changed. I began comparing our life to everyone else's. Social media made it worse. Former classmates posted pictures from luxury resorts, rooftop restaurants, new cars, and enormous houses. I started wondering why our lives didn't look like theirs. I stopped noticing the way Callum left fresh coffee beside my laptop every morning. I stopped noticing that he remembered every little thing I said. Instead, I noticed his old watch. His practical shoes. His tendency to choose inexpensive restaurants. I convinced myself that we had settled. Then came the reunion invitation. It was scheduled for a sunny Saturday afternoon at the Grand Alder Hotel, a beautiful place with glass walls, tall trees outside, and sunlight pouring across polished floors. For weeks, I planned what I would wear. I bought a new dress, changed my hairstyle, and practiced answers to questions I knew people would ask. I wanted everyone to believe I had become exactly the woman I once promised myself I would become. Callum noticed my excitement and smiled. He even bought me a small silver bracelet to wear that day. I remember looking at it and thinking it was sweet but inexpensive. That should have been my warning. When we arrived at the reunion, the courtyard was filled with old classmates. There were hugs, laughter, surprised expressions, and stories about teachers everyone had nearly forgotten. People talked about their careers, marriages, children, and vacations. I felt strangely nervous, as if I were 17 again and waiting to find out whether I belonged. Then I saw Soren Whitaker. Back in high school, Soren had been the boy everyone admired. He had become a successful investor and arrived at the reunion in a polished car that seemed designed to announce his arrival before he even stepped through the door. Several former classmates gathered around him immediately. He shook hands, laughed loudly, and talked about his new home overseas. When he noticed me, his eyes widened with recognition. He complimented my career, asked about my life, and then glanced toward Callum. Someone asked how long we had been married. I smiled and said 12 years. Then Soren jokingly asked whether Callum had always been my type. Everyone laughed. And instead of defending the man who had loved me through every difficult season of my life, I laughed too. I said that Callum had been my backup plan. The words came out lightly. Almost playfully. But the laughter died. Callum stood beside me holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. His face was calm, but his eyes had changed. He looked directly at me and asked me to repeat what I had said. For a second, I thought he was joking. Then I saw the pain in his expression. I tried to laugh it off, telling him he knew I didn't mean it that way. But he didn't smile. He simply placed his glass on the table and walked away. The rest of the afternoon became a blur. I tried to continue conversations, but suddenly every compliment felt meaningless. Every laugh sounded too loud. I watched Callum standing alone beneath a tree outside the courtyard. He wasn't angry. Somehow, that made it worse. Eventually, I followed him. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse me. He simply told me that he had spent 12 years believing he was my first choice. He said he could forgive a careless joke, but he couldn't pretend he hadn't heard what was underneath it. Then he reminded me of something I had forgotten. Years earlier, when my career was falling apart, I had told him I was afraid everyone would eventually leave me once they realized I wasn't as successful as they thought. He had answered that he wasn't marrying my success. He was marrying me. Now he told me that somewhere along the way, I had started treating his love like something I could use whenever everything else failed. My heart broke because I knew he was right. That evening, Callum didn't come home. I sat alone in our kitchen, staring at the silver bracelet he had given me. For the first time, I noticed the tiny engraving on its inside. It said, "Still choosing you." I began to cry. I thought about every time he had chosen me when choosing me was inconvenient. Every late-night drive to pick me up. Every birthday he had quietly planned. Every dream of mine he had supported without demanding credit. I realized that while I had been busy searching for a life that looked impressive, I had nearly destroyed the life that had been beautiful all along. The next morning, I drove to the small workshop where Callum had once repaired bicycles before taking his management job. He wasn't there. His former coworker told me Callum had taken the weekend to think. I returned home and found a handwritten note on the kitchen table. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It was a list. At the top were the words, "Things I loved about us." Underneath were 27 memories. Our first rainy walk. The terrible cake I baked on our second anniversary. The night we danced in the kitchen because our favorite song came on the radio. The morning we found out our niece was going to be born. The time we got lost on vacation and laughed for 3 hours. He had remembered everything. I had forgotten almost all of it. That afternoon, I went to the park where we had our first date. The sun was bright, the sidewalks were crowded, and children were riding bicycles beneath the trees. Callum was sitting on the same bench where we had once talked for hours. I sat beside him. This time, I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I didn't say it was just a joke. I told him the truth. I told him that I had spent years trying to impress people who barely remembered what classes we had taken together. I told him I had mistaken expensive things for valuable things. I admitted that calling him my backup plan wasn't the truth at all. He had never been my backup plan. He had been the person who stayed when every other plan failed. He had been my home. Callum looked at me for a long time. Then he told me forgiveness wasn't a switch he could turn on. It would take time. It would require me to change, not simply apologize. So I promised him I would stop trying to make our life look impressive and start making it meaningful. Months passed. I changed in small ways. I stopped measuring happiness by what other people could see. I began appreciating quiet breakfasts, evening walks, old movies, and the sound of Callum laughing from another room. I asked him about his dreams again. I listened when he spoke. And when people complimented me, I stopped pretending that I had built my life alone. 1 year later, we returned to the same hotel for another gathering. The afternoon sun poured through the glass walls just as it had before. Someone asked how we were doing. I looked at Callum. Then I smiled. I told them I had married the man who taught me that love isn't a trophy you display. It is a person you choose, especially when nobody is watching. Callum squeezed my hand. And this time, I wasn't embarrassed by our ordinary life. I was grateful for it. Because the greatest tragedy isn't losing someone who loves you. Sometimes, it is having someone who loves you completely and becoming too distracted to realize what you have. And sometimes, the most beautiful second chance begins when you finally stop asking, "What will everyone think?" and start asking, "Who has been standing beside me all this time?" If this story touched your heart, please don't just watch it and move on. Like the video, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to Heart Kindness Tales so more stories like this can reach people who need them.